They boarded the plane without me, smiled for group photos without me. And when I finally said no, I became the villain. I woke up to a group chat exploding with airport selfies. Everyone grinning. Everyone but me. The cold light filtering through my bedroom blinds didn't prepare me for the sudden sting in my chest. I blinked twice at the phone, certain I was misreading the screen. But no, there they were. Karen beaming in her red cashmere coat. Logan making a goofy peace sign in front of the terminal sign. Even little Haley, with her pink headphones slung around her neck, smiling up at the camera like she didn't have a care in the world. My family, my mother, my brother, my niece, all on their way to Aspen. Without me. Karen once joked, "You're too serious for vacation photos, Claire." I had laughed. I shouldn't have. I should have known that was her way of testing the waters, seeing if I'd flinch, if I'd catch the undertone. I pushed the comforter off and sat up slowly, the chill in the air doing nothing to clear the haze of disbelief. My heart thumped dully, like it couldn't decide whether to be angry or just broken. The notifications kept coming. Stories, reels, live updates of their airport antics. Logan filming himself pretending to forget his passport. Karen pointing to a group of carolers at O'Hare. Haley zooming in on the snow-covered runway. But not one message to me. Not a "wish you were here." Not even a passive-aggressive "hope you're enjoying your weekend." It was like I didn't exist. I scrolled back, trying to see where the invitation had gone wrong. Maybe I'd missed something. An email thread? A group text? I checked every folder. Promotions, spam, deleted items. Nothing. Then Haley's name popped up on my screen. Just a short DM. "I thought you said you weren't coming?" I stared at the message. My fingers hovered over the screen before I typed back. "I never said that. I was never invited." Seen. No reply. I closed the app and sat still for a moment, listening. Outside, the faint sounds of Bing Crosby floated from the neighbor's unit. White Christmas? Of course. I looked at my own apartment, half decorated, half forgotten. The wreath still sat in the box by the door, the tree lights tangled on the kitchen counter. The truth settled in like sleet on bare skin. This wasn't an oversight. It was deliberate. I walked to my desk and opened my laptop, pulling up last year's Christmas folder. There they were, the photos I took, the gifts I wrapped in gold foil, the candlelit dinner I made when Karen insisted everyone was too tired to cook. And the memory, me holding out gifts no one opened until I left the room. Why did I even try? I called Karen, straight to voicemail. I called again. This time she picked up. "Claire?" she said, her voice breezy and annoyed, like I'd interrupted something trivial. "What's wrong? Are you in Aspen?" "Well, yes. Without me." A pause. "You never seemed interested in family events." The words landed sharp and final, like a slap. I wanted to scream, to demand how many years of showing up hadn't counted. But the line went quiet, then clicked. I didn't cry. Not right away. I went to the kitchen and stood by the window, watching the city carry on like the world hadn't just cracked beneath my feet. The cab horns, the frost clinging to the ledge, the paper snowflakes taped to the bodega window across the street. Everything looked the same, but I wasn't. A ping pulled me back to the screen. One new email. Subject: Holiday Estate Reminder, Lawson Cabin Access Confirmed. From Edwin Stokes, Escure Body. Dear Ms. Lawson, this is a friendly reminder that your access to the Lawson family cabin is valid from December 16th through December 31st. Keys are available for pickup at our downtown office. Happy holidays. I stared at the message. They left me behind. But the cabin was mine now. I didn't pack for revenge. I packed to breathe. The snow hadn't stopped since I left Chicago. By the time I turned off the main road and onto the winding path toward the cabin, it felt like I was slipping through a white silence. The kind of silence that held you. Not because it was empty, but because it remembered. The tires crunched over the packed snow as I reached the front of the cabin. It was smaller than I recalled, or maybe the memories had made it grander. The pines stood tall and unspeaking around it, as if they too had aged since the last time I was here. I killed the engine, let the heater hum a few seconds longer, then stepped out into the biting cold. My breath fogged instantly. I didn't look at the house right away. Instead, I looked at the sky, dull and heavy, and wondered if ghosts recognized you when you came back wearing a different face. Dad once said, "You don't run from ghosts, you host them until they go quiet." At the time, I thought he was being poetic. Now I wasn't so sure. The cabin door groaned like it hadn't been opened in years. Inside, the air was sharp and stale. I flicked the lights. Nothing. Of course. I made my way around the back, where the old generator sat beneath a thin coat of snow. The switch took effort, but after a sputter and a low rumble, the power kicked in. Lights blinked, the thermostat stuttered to life, and I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. I stood in the middle of the living room, just listening. The silence wasn't so absolute now. A hum here, a creak there. The place remembered me. There were still little pieces of him everywhere. The oak rocking chair by the fireplace, the record player on the shelf, crooked, dusty, and loaded with the same Nat King Cole vinyl from the last Christmas we spent together. A half-decorated wreath sat on the table, wire exposed, as if someone had stopped midway and forgot to finish. That someone had been me. I walked slowly through each room. Everything was familiar but faded. The worn rug, the window seat where I used to read, the framed photo of us sledding, still crooked above the mantel. And then came the memory, uninvited but welcome. He was in the kitchen, stirring hot cocoa. It was snowing, and I was laughing because he'd burned the cookies. He'd looked at me and said, not for the first time, "This place, someday it's yours. Not because of inheritance, but because you showed up when no one else did." I had brushed it off then, thinking it was his way of thanking me for a quiet weekend. I never thought he meant it literally. My phone buzzed. "Sophie." "Hey," I answered, voice low. "Made it in okay?" she asked. "Yeah, power's on. Place is still full of him." A pause. "You're the legal owner now. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." I swallowed. "I know. You don't sound like you do." I didn't respond. She knew me too well to push. After we hung up, I made tea and settled by the fire. It took a long time for the chill to leave my bones, but when it did, I wandered over to Dad's desk. It was just as he'd left it. Meticulous, organized, and slightly outdated. The drawers were mostly empty except for paper clips and old receipts. But the bottom one, the one he always kept locked, clicked open with surprising ease. Inside was a single folder, labeled in his handwriting, "Cabin, Claire only." My heart thudded. I pulled it out, the manila edges soft with age. Inside, the original deed, and a handwritten note. "If they ever forget what you gave up, let this remind them." I read the words twice, then once more. My throat tightened. He knew. Even then, he knew they'd try to erase me. He just didn't know how soon. I hadn't heard from them in days, until they needed a key. The fire had dulled to a steady orange glow, casting long shadows over the living room walls. I was curled on the couch with an old blanket from the linen closet. One my dad used to joke was good enough for ghosts and daughters. When my phone buzzed sharply, slicing through the quiet. "Karen." I stared at the screen, her name blinking like a warning. The woman hadn't messaged me in over a week. Not when I found out I wasn't on the flight to Aspen. Not when I texted her a simple "Merry Christmas" that morning and got no reply. But now suddenly I was worth contacting. I let it ring. Twice. 3 times. Then I answered, keeping my voice neutral. "Hi. We're coming up tomorrow," she said without preamble. The usual group. Logan, Haley, me, Uncle Rob. Just make sure the heat's running and the drive's plowed. There it was. Not a question. Not an invitation. A command. like she assumed the cabin was theirs and I was simply the caretaker. "I'll be using the cabin," I replied. A pause, just long enough to feel like a tremor. "What?" "I'm here now," I said, quieter but no less firm. "I'll be staying through New Year's." Silence bloomed on the other end of the line. Then came the tight, clipped tone I knew too well. "Claire, this cabin, this house means nothing without all of us together." My fingers curled around the phone. Funny, it meant enough for Dad to leave it to me. Another beat of silence. "Well, we'll still be coming up," she said sharply. "We've made plans. We're not canceling just because you decided to isolate." I hung up before I could say something I'd regret. The phone buzzed again almost instantly. This time, a text from Logan. "Logan, seriously? You're being selfish. You're always about control." I stared at it until the screen dimmed. Sophie's name popped up next, like a lifeline. "Sophie. Just heard. You okay?" I typed a simple reply. "They think they can still show up." 3 dots appeared. Then, "Sophie. Ownership means you get to decide." Full stop, I stared at that message longer than I thought I would. Simple. Director. True. Outside, the wind howled against the windows. I pulled the blanket tighter and stood, pacing to the kitchen and back. I wasn't afraid, but I was wary. This wasn't about weather. It was about pattern. And the pattern had always been the same. They pushed, I yielded. They ignored, I forgave. Not this time. I went to Dad's old office and retrieved the key fob from the drawer marked Garage. Then, with my laptop open and the Wi-Fi finally cooperating, I logged into the home security dashboard and changed the gate code. The new code wasn't symbolic. It was just mine. I clicked the box labeled Camera Upgrade. 10 minutes later, a confirmation pinged. Installation Kit Shipping Express. But the basics, the gate sensor and door cams, were already online. I activated motion detection and alerts. I didn't feel powerful, but I felt present, anchored. Later, I lit a single candle and played the record player softly. Nat King Cole again, smooth and familiar. I sat in the armchair and watched the shadows move across the ceiling. The house had always been quiet, but tonight, the quiet felt earned. My phone vibrated. Motion detected. East Gate, 9:47 p.m. I rose, walked to the window, and pulled back the curtain. Far down the snowy path, just past the tree line, a pair of headlights blinked once, then disappeared. "You changed the locks?" Karen's voice cracked with disbelief. I didn't answer. I was standing in the hallway just off the foyer, far enough from the front windows to stay unseen, close enough to hear every knock, every raised voice, every insult laced with entitlement. The snow had thickened in the last hour, muffling most of the outside world, except for them. I'd seen the SUV pull up before they even reached the gate, headlights slicing through the tree line like a searchlight. I'd muted my phone, lit the fireplace, and made tea. I had no interest in theatrics, but I watched. The moment Karen stepped out and realized her old key didn't work, her face twisted, equal parts confusion and offense. Logan tried next, more forcefully, as if jamming the key harder would force the lock to remember who they were. The door held. Bang, bang, bang. "Claire," Karen shouted. "We know you're in there." I stood very still, fingers curled around the ceramic mug, heartbeat steady. Not cold, not angry, just resolved, more pounding. Logan's voice this time. "Are you seriously doing this? Are you kidding me?" I picked up my phone and typed a single text. "Please leave. You're trespassing." Sent. Delivered. Read. There was a pause outside. Then Karen's voice again, louder and shriller than before. "This cabin belongs to this family. I will call the attorney. You think you can just steal what's ours?" I watched her from the side window as she paced, coat flapping in the wind, Logan standing behind her like a shadow. He wasn't shouting anymore. He was looking at the woods, uneasy. The property was large, surrounded by pine, with no neighboring houses in sight. Here, privacy wasn't a feature. It was law. I turned away and walked slowly back to the living room. The fire crackled low. My father's old flannel blanket was draped over the arm of the couch. His absence was everywhere, but so was his presence. I sat down and opened my laptop. New message. To Sophie Garland. Subject: time to make it official. Hey, Sophie. They showed up. Tried to enter. Threatened legal action. I want to file a cease and desist. Let's make it official. Claire. I clicked send and sat back, letting the heat of the mug seep into my palms. They always thought my silence was permission, that my calm was weakness. Haley once asked me, "Why don't you ever raise your voice?" I had smiled and told her, "Because when I do, I don't yell. I close the doors." I guessed today she'd understand. The knocking had stopped. I didn't look to see if they were still there. Instead, I let myself breathe in the quiet. Ping. I checked my phone. A new text, this time from Haley. "They're freaking out. Are you okay?" I stared at the message. Then, for the first time all day, I smiled. The cabin didn't just store firewood. It stores truths he never dared to speak. Snowfall had blanketed the property in absolute silence, the kind of hush so dense you could almost hear your own thoughts echoing. I stood at the base of the attic ladder, flashlight in hand, heart ticking faster than I liked to admit. Something had been tugging at me since I found the folder in his desk, the one labeled Cabin Claire Only. Dad had been meticulous, yes, but also sentimental. He wouldn't have left just one breadcrumb. There had to be more. I pulled the ladder down. It groaned, joints stiff with cold and time. A puff of dust greeted me as I climbed slowly, step by creaking step. The attic smelled like old pine and insulation, with a hint of forgotten winters. The flashlight beam danced across forgotten suitcases, empty picture frames, and a yellowed newspaper from some Christmas past. Then I saw it, wedged behind a beam, partially hidden beneath a collapsed cardboard box. A small metal lockbox, scratched but sturdy. I pulled it out, coughing at the cloud of dust it kicked up. No key, of course. Back downstairs, I fetched the toolkit from under the sink and returned with a flathead screwdriver. It took some finesse and maybe a little frustration, but the box finally popped open with a loud metallic snap. Inside was a sealed envelope, thick and slightly warped from time. My name was written across it in my father's handwriting. Claire. I held it for a moment, longer than I should have. Just the sight of his writing again felt like a whisper from a different time. Carefully, I slid my finger beneath the seal and opened it. Claire, if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer here. And that they've done what I feared. I never said it out loud, but I saw how they treated you. How they excluded you, diminished you, made you feel like an outsider in your own family. You gave up years for them. You showed up when no one else did. And I let them ignore it because I thought blood would bring them back around. I was wrong. So I left you something they couldn't touch. This cabin, it's yours, not just on paper, but in spirit. In truth, it's the only place I ever felt like I could say what needed to be said. I'm sorry for the silence. But this is my voice now. Use it. Dad. I read the letter 3 times before I called Sophie. She answered on the second ring. Hey, you okay? I found a letter, I said. My voice didn't sound like mine. From him. I read it aloud, slowly, every word dragging up feelings I hadn't made space for. When I finished, Sophie was quiet. Then she asked, "Was it dated?" Yes, a few months before he passed. And the box was locked? Hidden? Yes. Claire, she said, her voice steadier than mine. That letter could have legal weight, especially combined with the deed. It's not just about intention. It confirms his wishes. I know, I whispered. She let me sit with that. I walked to the kitchen table and pulled out my laptop. My hands didn't shake this time. I opened a new email and typed, 2. Karen Lawson. No, you may not access the cabin. It's mine, both in intention and in law. Claire, I hit send. The snowfall outside thickened, blurring the edge of the forest. I stood by the window, listening to the hum of the furnace and the occasional creak of the wood beams above. Somewhere, I imagined him smiling. Not a wide grin, just a knowing one. The way he used to when I solved a hard problem without help. My phone buzzed. Haley. Wait, did Grandpa really say that? I didn't reply right away. Not because I didn't know the answer, but because I was finally learning how powerful silence could be, when it was mine to own. At 6 p.m. on Christmas Eve, I expected carols, not a cease and desist. The fire had just settled into a quiet rhythm, throwing flickering light onto the cabin's cedar walls. I'd put on one of my father's old records, instrumental jazz, low and warm, and was midway through stirring a pot of cider when the knock came. Not a gentle tap. Not a neighborly greeting. 3 sharp raps, precise, businesslike. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and walked slowly to the door. When I opened it, the wind blew in hard, scattering snow and silence across the entryway. A man in a navy parka and delivery boots stood holding a large envelope. Claire Lawson? He asked. I nodded, the name sounding distant. He handed over the envelope without further comment, then turned and walked briskly back to a dark SUV waiting at the edge of the driveway. No Christmas greeting, no smile. I closed the door and locked it. Back by the fire, I opened the envelope. Heavy stock paper, too many pages. The title stared at me in bold black font. Intent to file suit, unauthorized occupancy. I sat down, heart tightening. The letter wasn't just aggressive, it was personal. Accusations, thinly veiled as legal claims, engaging in exclusionary behavior, creating emotional distress for family members with a history of shared ownership, erratic behavior raising concern about mental and emotional stability. The words bled together until one stood out in harsh clarity. Selfish. They had called me selfish. I picked up my phone and dialed Sophie. Claire? She answered on the first ring. I got something, I said. Legal. Describe it. I did, reading the phrases aloud until I stumbled on the part that made my throat tighten. The line suggesting I was unstable. That I'd weaponized grief to isolate myself from the rightful family unit. They're trying to scare you, Sophie said firmly. This isn't about law. It's about power. I looked down at the pages. Can they actually do this? Not with the documents we have, but we'll respond. Tonight. I heard keys clacking on her end of the line. We'll send them a formal rebuttal. Attach the deed, your father's letter, and cite your legal right to exclusive occupancy. It's aggressive, but legally sound. Want to add anything personal? I thought about it. About years of silence. About how they forgot birthdays, or remembered them only with backhanded jabs. About the time I offered to pay for Mom's physical therapy sessions and was told, Claire, we're not your project. Add a line, I said. This cabin is not a shared delusion. It's a documented bequest, and my father's clearest act of intention. Done, Sophie replied. I'll send you the draft in 5. Sign it, scan it, email it back. We'll send it tonight. Thank you, I said quietly. 5 minutes later, the rebuttal arrived in my inbox. Sharp, clear, and unflinching. I added the deed, the notarized ownership document, and scanned the letter Dad wrote me. I didn't reread it. I didn't need to. Click, sent. The fire had dimmed again. I stood and stoked it, one hand on the iron poker, the other resting on the hearth. The room was warm, safe. The cabin didn't care about letters or threats. It remembered love, presence, the touch of hands that built it. My phone buzzed. Haley, calling. I answered uncertain. Her voice came in a whisper, urgent and hushed. I found something. On Grandpa's laptop. Hidden folder. I don't want Mom to know. I blinked. What is it? I'm not sure yet, she said. But it doesn't match what they told me. Can I come see you? Alone? The wind outside rose again, sweeping snow against the windows in swirling gusts. Yes, I said, my voice calm and steady. Come. He drafted it but never hit send, Haley said, her voice shaking. Her coat was still damp from the snow when she stepped into the cabin, eyes wide, hands trembling as she clutched her phone. She had arrived barely 20 minutes earlier, the cab idling long enough to cast its headlights briefly across the snow-dusted porch before backing out toward the main road. Now she stood in the center of the room, framed by the soft crackle of firelight and the flicker of old Christmas lights I'd strung along the mantel. She looked small, too small for someone who had once declared at a Thanksgiving dinner that she'd never need anyone's help. She handed me her phone wordlessly. A file was already open. Subject line? For Claire, if I don't get the chance. My fingers hovered over the screen. The timestamp was from 1.5 years ago, 2 months before Dad passed. I glanced up at her and she nodded. I found it in a hidden folder on his laptop. It was buried in the documents archive. I don't think anyone else saw it. I sat down on the couch, heart pounding, and read. Claire, I keep thinking I'll say all this in person, but I've never been good at the direct things. I always needed the fire crackling or music playing or something in my hands to keep me from saying too much. You left for law school and I said, don't forget where you come from. But the truth is, I should have said, don't let where you come from hold you back. I saw what they did, Claire. How they shifted the weight onto you. How they took your kindness for convenience. You showed up when no one else did. You stayed when it was hard. And for that, I owe you something more than thanks. The cabin is yours. Always was. I just never found the words to make it clear fast enough. If I don't get to say it, thank you for being the daughter who didn't need to be asked. Dad. I didn't realize my eyes had welled up until I blinked and the screen blurred. Haley knelt beside me, her face pale, eyes rimmed red. He drafted it. He meant to send it. I was so sure he was neutral, that he didn't pick sides. I swallowed hard, still holding the phone like it might disappear. He picked a side, I whispered. He just couldn't say it out loud. She pressed her hands together in front of her mouth. I was blind, she said, and then her voice cracked. I let them tell me you were cold, distant, that you didn't care. And I let them convince me I didn't matter, I said softly. The silence between us was thick, not heavy, just full of unspoken grief, of the weight of years both of us had carried differently, one through ignorance, the other through erasure. I reached for her hand. She hesitated, then let me take it. You have no idea how long I've waited to hear someone say that, I said. We sat like that for a while. The fire popped. Outside, the snow fell in thick, lazy drifts that softened every sound. It was Christmas Day, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was standing outside my own family. Haley wiped her eyes. Can I stay for a bit? Of course. I stood and moved toward the kitchen. I made cider, still warm. She followed, tentative, like someone stepping into a house of worship after years away. I poured 2 mugs, passed one to her, and for a few minutes we just sipped in silence. Then my phone buzzed. Sophie, calling. I picked up. Hey, Haley's here. She found... I know. Sophie cut in, breathless. But you need to hear this. We just found something too. The original notarized will. The real one. I froze. The real one? You mean, it names you, she said. Not them, exclusively. And it's dated after the copy Karen's lawyer filed. My pulse spiked. Sophie's voice sharpened. Claire, this changes everything. Sophie's voice was calm. Too calm. Claire, they hid a version of the will. But I have the one your father signed last. The fire crackled softly beside me, but it felt like the temperature in the cabin dropped 10 degrees. On screen, Sophie sat in her law office in Milwaukee, framed by shelves lined with legal journals and a mug that said, "Don't argue with me unless you brought precedent." Her fingers hovered over her keyboard as she spoke, but her eyes never left mine. "I found it in the e-records backup server," she said. "Most people don't even know that system exists, but your dad did. It's time-stamped, notarized, and logged in the county archive. December 28th, 2 years ago." Haley sat on the rug, cradling a cup of tea in both hands. She looked up sharply. "Wait, so he did update it?" Sophie nodded. "Yes, and not just updated. He made it explicit. This version leaves the cabin to Claire, exclusively. No shared ownership. No contingency clauses, no trustee control." I didn't breathe. Not for a full 3 seconds. Karen had filed a version of the will after Dad died. It named all 3 children as equal heirs of all properties, except the cabin. For that one, it simply read, "See prior agreement," which of course no one had ever seen, or claimed to have seen, until now. Sophie clicked something on her end and a PDF filled the screen. Her cursor moved across the page. "There," she said. My name was highlighted in yellow. "Claire Lawson, sole beneficiary and title holder of 442 Pine Loop Drive, hereafter referred to as the Lawson Winter property." My chest tightened. A beat passed before I spoke. "Why didn't this come up during probate?" "Because Karen never submitted this version," Sophie replied. "And your father didn't leave a physical copy in the house. I think he was trying to avoid confrontation. Or maybe he knew someone might intercept it." Haley sat back, stunned. "So the copy Mom showed the lawyer was obsolete," Sophie said, "and intentionally misleading." I ran a hand through my hair. The silence felt like a second heartbeat, pounding against the walls of the cabin. Sophie continued, "This is legally unbreakable, Claire. It's recorded, notarized, and finalized. Unless your mother can prove coercion or fraud, which is practically impossible post-mortem, you're the sole legal owner. No court would side against you." Haley stared into the fire. "She lied. To all of us." "She lied to protect her illusion," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "And now it's cracking." On the screen, Sophie leaned forward. "You hold the strongest card now, legally and ethically. But that also means the next move will be desperate. Expect escalation." I looked around the room. This room that still held Dad's scent in the worn wood, the familiar creak in the floor near the back window, the dent in the mantel where he once dropped a snow globe. It wasn't just a house. It was the only space where I'd ever felt like I mattered without needing to earn it. I exhaled. "What do we do next?" "I'll email the document to you now," Sophie said. "Print it. Sign an acknowledgement. We'll file an ownership claim and notify the registrar's office in the morning." My phone buzzed. A voicemail notification. From Karen. I didn't play it right away. Instead, I looked at the transcript that loaded automatically. "We're driving up. We're not asking this time." I didn't answer the door. I answered with a projection. Video footage, live, for all of them to see. The knock came just after noon, sharp and impatient. Then again, harder, more insistent. Through the window above the sink, I could see the flash of Logan's jacket, then Karen's beige coat trudging up the snowy path like they owned it. They didn't even hesitate. Not a text, not a call. They had driven 4 hours assuming I'd roll over, but I had prepared. Haley stood a few feet behind them, arms folded, her expression unreadable. She hadn't come to speak, only to witness. The speakers mounted under the porch eaves crackled to life. I tapped a button on the app Sophie had helped me set up, and Dad's voice, recorded from the letter he'd dictated years ago, began to play. "I want Claire to have this place. She's the one who understood what it meant." The words carried into the cold air, cutting through the wind like a blade. Karen froze mid-step. Logan blinked like he'd heard a ghost. I tapped again. A monitor I'd mounted beside the door flickered on. The scanned document loaded. My father's signature bold, the notary seal embossed below. Logan stepped back. "What the hell is this?" he shouted. It's fraud, Karen said quickly, but her voice trembled. This doesn't mean anything. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The speakers clicked again, and Sophie's voice, sharp, confident, rang out next. A pre-recorded explanation. This document is legally binding. This property belongs to Claire Lawson. Any unauthorized attempt to enter constitutes trespassing under state law. I watched them from inside the living room, arms crossed, heart steady. The flames in the fireplace cast a soft flicker behind me, but my focus was locked on the outside. My neighbors from across the road had gathered by their mailbox, watching quietly. One of them even raised a phone. Karen noticed. She turned her face. Logan approached the door again. Claire, stop this. You're making a scene. I pressed another button. A final message played. You forfeited your say the day you tried to erase me. He turned to Karen. She's bluffing. Karen didn't answer. Her hands were clenched, jaw tight. Then I opened the door. Only a crack, no more than 2 inches. In my hand was a sealed envelope. I held it through the gap. No more games, I said quietly. This is a formal notice. Trespass again, and I'll press charges. Neither of them moved at first. Then Karen stepped forward, reaching to snatch the letter, but I let it fall to the porch instead. Haley knelt and picked it up before Karen could. She held it carefully, looking at me for a long moment. Then down at the envelope. She didn't say anything, but she didn't hand it to her mother either. Logan muttered, She's bluffing. Karen looked at him, shaken. By January 1st, the cabin had no visitors, just purpose. The snow had softened everything. Trees stood like guardians wrapped in white shawls, and the wind had fallen into a hush. Inside, the cabin glowed with a new kind of warmth. Not just firelight, but intent. Claire stood at the corkboard her father once used to pin grocery lists, maintenance notes, half-torn magazine clippings. Now it held something else. Diagrams, scribbled bullet points, a printed mock-up labeled Cabin Project, for women who need space. She stepped back, arms crossed, lips pressed. The phrase kept echoing in her mind. Build something that won't just outlive you. Make it outlove them. He'd said it during one of their long drives, maybe thinking she wasn't really listening. But she had. She always did when it came to him. Haley entered the room slowly, a ceramic mug in hand. Peppermint, she offered. Claire took it, nodding thanks. I read through everything last night, Haley said. It's incredible. I mean, this idea, women needing a space after being erased by their own families, it feels like a lifeline. Claire looked back at the board. It's what I wished existed. For years. Someplace quiet. Someplace mine. But I think I can make it ours. Haley hesitated, then reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small, battered ornament, a wooden angel Claire had carved with her father years ago. The paint had chipped, but the etched initials remained. I found it buried in one of the old boxes Mom never unpacked, Haley said softly. Thought you might want it. Claire took it with both hands. For a long moment, she couldn't speak. She rose and hung it carefully on a hook above the fireplace. The angel turned slightly in the air, catching the morning light. Mr. Dell knocked gently on the porch before stepping in, stomping snow off his boots. Saw your car. Thought I'd drop off the new propane tank. Looks like you're putting the place to real use, huh? Claire smiled. Trying to. He nodded, looking at the board with mild curiosity, but didn't pry. Place feels different already, he murmured, then tipped his hat and left. They returned to the corkboard. Haley reached for one of the sticky notes and added, Trauma group partnerships? Claire chuckled. Already ahead of me. Haley's tone shifted. Claire, I know this doesn't fix anything. What we did, what I let them do, can't be undone. But maybe this is how I make it right. I want to help, however I can. Claire didn't respond right away. Instead, she clinked her mug gently against Haley's. Then let's do it. That night, the fire crackled while Claire sat in front of her laptop, fingers poised over the keyboard. The project website was simple but clean. Photos of the cabin, a mission statement, a donation page. She took a breath, then hit publish. Moments later, a notification pinged. A donation. $5,000. Claire blinked. The note attached read only, "In memory of better games played in silence." Her phone buzzed. Sophie. From someone in your father's old chess club. The quiet ones always notice. Claire stared at the screen, heart pounding. Not from surprise, but from clarity. This wasn't just her story anymore. It was a beginning. She closed her laptop. Let's begin. ChatGPT Jan Noi. The invitation read, Family mediation session, January 3rd, 11 a.m. I RSVP'd. I'll be there, with counsel. The building was nothing special, just a standard commercial brick structure with a modest sign that read, Meyer and Powell Conflict Resolution Services. But the air outside was frigid and tense, and Claire knew that nothing about what was about to unfold inside would be standard. She arrived precisely 10 minutes early, Sophie by her side, crisp blazer buttoned and legal pad tucked beneath one arm like a weapon. Claire wore black, not for mourning, but for precision. The lobby was stark and quiet, a single plant in the corner trying its best to stay alive under fluorescent light. Claire sat with her hands folded in her lap, not bothering to check her phone. Sophie leaned over and whispered, No matter how this goes, remember? We're walking in with the law. They're walking in with noise. The receptionist called their name at 11 o'clock sharp. Claire rose, spine straight. The mediation room was glass-walled and sterile. On the far side sat Karen and Logan. Karen's eyes flickered briefly with surprise before she softened her expression into a brittle smile. Claire, she said, like they were at brunch. You look thin. Claire didn't answer. She sat down opposite them. Haley was already seated at the end of the table, flanked by a neutral party. The mediator, a middle-aged woman named Trina, with soft eyes but firm posture. Haley offered Claire a hesitant nod. It was the only thing warm in the room. Trina began with the standard protocol. Names, purpose, reminder of civility. Claire noted how Karen's foot tapped under the table. Logan leaned back in his chair like he couldn't be bothered. We're here to resolve concerns over property access, Trina began. Mrs. Karen Lawson and Mr. Logan Lawson have expressed grievances over their inability to use the Lawson family cabin. Ms. Claire Lawson Karen cut in, has locked us out of our own history. On Christmas, no less. Claire remained silent. Sophie lifted an eyebrow but let Karen speak. Karen continued, We've always spent Christmas there. Claire was never really present. Suddenly she shows up, uninvited, and claims it all as hers. It's divisive, cruel even. We thought she was mature enough to share. Logan nodded. She didn't even tell us she'd be there. Who does that? It's manipulative. Trina turned to Claire. Ms. Lawson? Claire looked at Sophie, who nodded. Then she opened her folder and pulled out a copy of the will. This is the notarized final will and testament of Ronald Lawson, she said calmly. Dated 3 weeks before his passing. It names me as the sole legal beneficiary of the property. Sophie placed a second copy in front of Trina. Karen scoffed. He must have been confused. That's not the document I saw after the funeral. Sophie interjected, crisp and clear. The will presented by Mrs. Lawson was an earlier draft, legally superseded. This version is time-stamped, notarized, and registered, and Claire pulled out a small recorder and pressed play. Her father's voice filled the room, steady but soft. Claire always showed up. Quietly, but fully. She never asked for much. I wanted her to have peace, so I left her the place that gave me peace. Karen stiffened. Logan's arms crossed tighter. Trina pressed pause. She looked over the documents, glanced between the parties, then finally spoke. Legally, Claire is the sole owner. The will is valid and enforceable. Any attempt to contest this further without new evidence, may be considered harassment. Silence. Karen opened her mouth, then closed it. Claire felt the tight band around her chest loosen, just slightly. But the moment didn't end there. Logan stood abruptly, his chair screeching. He pointed a finger at Claire, eyes blazing. "You're not better than us. You just waited like a snake." Claire didn't flinch. Haley did. She drew back, her lips parting in quiet shock. The mediator raised a hand. "Please, Mr. Lawson, sit." But Logan was already walking out, his footsteps echoing like a stampede. Karen followed, slower, her face unreadable. Haley remained, her gaze fixed on the document still sitting in the center of the table. She didn't speak. But when Claire stood to leave, Haley rose too, and followed. Claire stepped out into the cold air again, and this time it felt sharper, but cleaner, like a storm had passed and left the truth behind. ChatGPT John Noy. Karen smiled sweetly to the press. She didn't know her mic was still on. The January wind bit at the edges of her tailored coat, but Karen Lawson stood as if she were basking in spring sun. Outside the Milwaukee courthouse, a small cluster of reporters and camera crew bustled about, setting up their tripods, adjusting lighting against the pale gray sky. Karen smoothed her blonde bob with a practiced hand and took her place at the modest podium she'd insisted the city allow her to use for the sake of public clarity. To an onlooker, she looked every inch the grieving matriarch, stylish, composed, wounded by family division, yet still advocating for healing. Behind her, Logan loomed with arms crossed, eyes darting between reporters like a man in over his head but unwilling to admit it. "Thank you all for coming," Karen began, her voice carefully modulated, every syllable shaped like a carefully arranged flower. "I never thought I'd be standing here to speak on something so personal. My late husband Ronald was a man of legacy. He built a family, a life full of traditions, the cabin in Wisconsin being one of them." Cameras clicked. "Our daughter Claire, God bless her, has been under immense stress, influenced by perhaps external advisors who may not have had our family's best interest at heart. This was never about property. It was about connection. Claire, if you're watching, please come home. Let's find unity, not division." From her apartment, Haley stared at the screen, eyes narrowed. "She's really doing it," she muttered, clutching a mug of tea that had long gone cold. Back at the courthouse, the lead reporter nodded gratefully. "Thank you, Mrs. Lawson. We'll cut there for broadcast." Powerful words. Karen smiled that perfect PR smile, the one she'd practiced in the mirror for years, the one that smoothed over school suspensions and neighborhood complaints. She stepped down from the podium and leaned toward Logan. What she didn't realize was that the audio feed was still hot. The live stream, though wrapped on air, was still running online. Haley saw it. So did a few thousand others. Karen's voice, hushed and clipped with disdain, bled through the feed. "Let her keep the damn cabin. We'll drain her spirit soon enough." Logan laughed. "She's more stubborn than I thought." Karen's chuckle had no warmth in it. "She's not stubborn, she's just naive. Claire always thinks facts win over perception, but people forget truths faster than good makeup." Haley's breath caught. The live stream didn't glitch. It didn't buffer. It didn't mute. And by the time Karen had slipped into the black sedan that pulled up to the curb, the internet had already saved, clipped, and shared the footage. Within 20 minutes, Shocker Mickgate and Karen Lawson trended locally. An hour later, clips showed up on Reddit, Twitter, even TikTok, captioned with, "The mask comes off," and "Sweetheart to snake in 10 seconds flat." Claire, still at the cabin, wasn't watching the news. She had just returned from a long walk through the surrounding woods, her boots dusted with snow, cheeks pink from the wind. She lit the fire, content in the silence, not yet knowing that the court of public opinion had just swung. Her laptop pinged. An email. The sender was unfamiliar. Subject: "Not just you." Message: "I used to work with your mother. You're not the first she's tried to erase." Claire froze. She stared at the screen, rereading the line 3 times. Her hands curled slightly over the edge of the keyboard. The fire crackled behind her, but the warmth no longer reached her spine. The storm wasn't over. It was changing shape. And now the public was watching. Karen's credit line was frozen. So was Logan's client account. News of the lockouts arrived not as a phone call or a warning, but as a silent refusal. Karen, halfway through swiping her platinum card at a downtown boutique, watched the screen flash red. Declined. The clerk gave her a tight smile, offering to try again. But the second attempt ended the same way. Across town, Logan stared at his bank app, blinking at the words, "Access restricted," stamped in gray across all his investment portfolios. He tapped, refreshed, swore. Nothing changed. They didn't know yet that Claire had known. For weeks, she'd been preparing the ripcord. Quietly, surgically. Not out of vengeance, but clarity. Her father's estate plan had included conditional triggers, set to go off in the event of an inheritance dispute. Sophie had found the clause 2 days after the mediation hearing, buried in a PDF annex titled Escrow Clauses Legacy Protection. Clause 4.2. Any party contesting Claire Lawson's primary ownership forfeits access to residual trusts and pending disbursements. Claire didn't need to lift a finger. The system her father trusted had finally spoken. It had started months ago, when Sophie began an informal audit into Claire's old college fund. What she found wasn't just neglect. It was misappropriation. Nearly $38,000 had been siphoned from Claire's account 15 years ago, rerouted into a joint family renovation loan that never manifested into any real repairs. Karen and Logan had signed off on the withdrawal, claiming at the time Claire had consented to help with house upgrades. Claire had been 19. Sophie had the digital signatures. She had the dates. She had the ledger trail. With the new will confirmed and the estate account now fully transferred, the estate's built-in safeguards activated. Claire's father hadn't just left her the cabin. He left her teeth. The credit union froze Karen's and Logan's access to any co-managed funds. Audits were triggered. Mandatory financial reviews demanded. One by one, small threads unraveled. A vacation house Karen had been planning to buy. A short-term investment Logan had in a new app startup. All now stalled, pending documentation and oversight. Social repercussions followed. Karen's weekly brunch circle shrank noticeably. Her friends, always polite, now seemed busy. Invitations disappeared. Logan, once the golden client of his consulting firm, noticed quieter rooms during meetings and fewer smiles from partners who had once toasted him. Claire watched from the cabin, not in glee, but in relief. This wasn't revenge. This was reckoning. Sophie called with an update. They filed a complaint. Logan claims you maliciously undermined his business. It won't go anywhere. We're countersuing with the fund misappropriation records. Claire didn't answer right away. She was watching snow fall from the window, thinking about the girl she was at 19. Quiet, obliging, unseen. How far will they go? Claire finally asked. As far as you let them, Sophie replied. But they're flailing now. No assets to leverage, no narrative left to spin. That afternoon, Logan stormed into Sophie's firm without an appointment. Cameras in the lobby caught every second. His red face, clenched fists, the paper in his hand waving like a flag of entitlement. I demand access to the rest of the files. He barked at the receptionist. Security was called. 2 minutes later, he was walking back out, eyes burning, past a cluster of associates peering from behind smoked glass doors. Claire heard about it not from Sophie, but from Haley, who sent her a TikTok clip. He really thought yelling at a lawyer's office would work? Haley messaged. Unreal. Claire smiled slightly. A brittle smile. The kind that carries no joy, only closure. That evening, an unexpected message pinged her inbox. The name was vaguely familiar. Sadie B., a cousin from her father's side she hadn't spoken to since high school. It read, I saw what happened. Thank you for standing up. You're not alone anymore. Claire stared at the words for a long time. Not alone. For most of her life, she had been told to shrink to fit, be quieter, be nicer, be smaller than the harm she had endured. And yet, here she was, receiving gratitude not for compliance, but for resistance. She looked around the cabin, her cabin, lit by the soft orange of firelight, still humming with the echo of her father's plans. Outside, the cold remained. But inside, something had thawed. It was over. But I still couldn't sleep. Not because I was afraid they'd return. They wouldn't. Not after the fallout, the headlines, the emails from people who finally saw. Not even because I doubted my decision, but because the weight hadn't vanished. It had shifted, settled in different corners of my chest. Quieter now, but no lighter. The snow outside blanketed everything in soft silence. A fresh storm had rolled in overnight, piling onto the trees like icing. I wrapped my cardigan tighter and sat on the floor of the attic, surrounded by forgotten things. A cracked box of ornaments, a yellowing shoebox full of receipts, and tucked between them, a folder I hadn't touched in decades. Inside were drawings I'd made as a child. One was of this very cabin, scribbled in crayon. The red door, crooked pine trees, stick figure versions of my family. My father smiling, Karen holding a mug, Logan off to the side. Me? I was in the window, looking out. I traced the lines with my fingers, remembering how I used to sit there watching them joke outside, too timid to step in. Always afraid I'd say the wrong thing. Take up too much space. Now, I was the only one inside, and the silence finally belonged to me. Downstairs, Haley stirred. She came up quietly and sat beside me, peering at the sketch. "You kept all these?" she asked. "No," I replied, folding the paper gently. "They kept me." Haley didn't speak for a while. Then, quietly, I registered for that course. Family law. There's a section on estate abuse and overlooked heirs. I looked at her, unsure whether I felt pride or sorrow first. "You don't owe me redemption, Haley." "I know," she said, "but I owe myself understanding, and maybe a chance to be better than the silence I grew up with." We sat in stillness, the kind only January gives, the kind where even breath feels sacred. When she went back downstairs, I stayed behind, placing the drawings in a new box labeled Keep. For once, I meant that word. Later that afternoon, Sophie called. Her voice was lighter than I'd ever heard it. "Final update. The cabin is now irrevocably yours. The land, the title, the trust funds connected. All secured. No loopholes." I let the silence fill the line. Then, "Thank you, Sophie. For everything." "You did the heavy lifting," she said. "I just handed you the tools." After the call, I stood in front of the fireplace, holding my father's final letter, the one he wrote with trembling hands and couldn't bear to send. I placed it in a dark walnut frame, centered above the mantel. The handwriting was faded but legible. The last line caught the firelight. "If they ever forget what you gave up, let this remind them." I didn't cry. Not because I didn't feel it, but because something deeper than tears settled inside me. A calm that felt earned. That evening, the last light of day painted the cabin in soft gold. Haley brewed tea. We didn't need to talk. Just the clinking of mugs, the flicker of the fire, and the sound of pages turning as she read through one of Dad's old journals. I checked my inbox one last time before bed. At the top was a new message. The subject line read, "Panel on Family Estrangement and Inheritance Abuse. Would you be our speaker?" I didn't slam the door. I never had to. I just stopped holding it open. There was something gentle about closure when you didn't force it. When it arrived, not as a crashing finale, but as a soft exhale. The air that morning was crisp, brittle with January frost, but the light was kind. It filtered through pine branches, making silver of everything it touched. Claire stepped out onto the porch, her breath curling in front of her like ribbon. Haley stood at the bottom of the steps, balancing a tray of thermoses. Inside, volunteers were beginning to arrive. some from neighboring towns, some from much farther. Each of them carried not just bags, but invisible weight. Stories, fractures, silence. Second car just pulled up. Haley called. Claire nodded. We're ready. The cabin had never looked more alive. The old wreath on the door had been replaced with a handmade wood-carved sign, The Hearth Project. Inside, fresh paint warmed the once muted walls. The attic had been converted into a reading loft. The downstairs den had become a group circle space with mismatched pillows, soft rugs, and a corkboard already peppered with anonymous notes. Today I was heard. First time I've slept through the night in months. Sophie had arrived early, this time in person, scarfed and glowing, holding a slim black folder. For you, she said, handing it to Claire. I had it reprinted on archival paper. Acid-free. It'll last 100 years. Inside was the will, the real one. Her name printed clean, decisive, final. Claire ran her fingers along the edge of the document, not to read it again, but to feel the texture of validation. Thank you, she said simply. They stepped into the main room. Chairs had been arranged in a semicircle. A kettle whistled in the kitchen. A woman named Tara, who had driven 5 hours from Iowa, sat near the fire flipping through an old legal guide. Another guest stood by the window, staring out, shoulders tense. This isn't a rehab, Sophie whispered, but it might as well be. For broken trust. Claire smiled. It's just a start. She walked to the fireplace, where her father's final letter still hung above the mantel. Haley adjusted one of the candles below it. I think he'd be proud, she said. Claire didn't reply. She didn't need to. At 10 a.m., sharp, she rang a small bell. Soft, brass, and familiar. Her guests gathered. Some sat, some stood, hesitant. Eyes flickered to her, uncertain whether to expect a speech or a sermon. Claire stood with no podium. Just her, arms relaxed, eyes steady. This place, she began, was once a sanctuary for one man. Then for a family. And eventually just for me, when no one else thought I mattered. She let the words settle. But it doesn't end there. This place isn't just mine. It's for anyone who's ever been told they didn't belong. Anyone who's been edited out of photos, plans, or wills. Anyone who's been asked to be smaller to make others more comfortable. The room held its breath. So today, we begin not with fixing the past, but with building something better. Not louder, not bigger, just more honest. The group nodded. Some eyes shimmered. Claire stepped down and walked among them, touching shoulders, exchanging names. The day moved gently. No one rushed. Conversations bloomed like careful flowers. Haley led a journaling session in the loft. Sophie gave legal pointers over tea. A local woodworker dropped off handmade coat hooks. Someone left a jar of blueberry jam by the entryway. By dusk, the guests had trickled out. Claire stood at the threshold, her hand resting lightly on the doorframe. The last woman to leave turned back and said, "Thank you for not giving up, on yourself or the rest of us." Claire nodded, words caught in her chest. She lingered a moment, then stepped inside, slowly closing the door behind her. It didn't creak or slam. It simply clicked. The fire in the hearth was low but steady. The cabin no longer echoed. It breathed. She turned toward the back window, gazing out at the woods, the snow-tipped branches swaying faintly in the wind. Let them wonder what I'll build next. What began as a quiet act of exclusion ended with undeniable proof and quiet power. Claire didn't just reclaim what was hers. She dismantled every lie, one document and one truth at a time. Like the final chord of a long-forgotten melody, justice may arrive late, but once it's heard, it cannot be silenced. No wall of lies can stand forever against the tide of truth. If this story moved you, like, share, and subscribe. And comment below. Type 1 if you felt seen. Type 2 if you think justice could have gone further.